Hello, everybody. This is Jason here with Levelhead Trading. Hope you're all doing well. Going to give you my update on Bitcoin and Ethereum. Also, just want to let you all know that I'm going to try to improve how I present my content and try to cut out all the crap because I tend to talk a lot, and there's a lot of things that I say that seem to be just repetitive, and it's driving me crazy. So I'm going to try to get better at that and just talk what's most relevant and without without going over it over and over again. But I'm still just trying to get better as time goes by, so bear with me. So here we go. We're going to look at the daily and weekly charts. That's all I'm going to look at with Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the reason for that is just because when you have big moves, then you just need to look at the big time frames. It doesn't really make much sense to look at a small time frame like an hourly when things are changing dramatically because that's too minute. So anyway, Bitcoin on the daily chart, now the EMA lines that I use, the 12 and the 26, have crossed over. I mentioned this in my last video. So zooming in right here, as you can see, they have crossed. So on this particular day here, I was talking about if you have any further downside, then these EMAs are going to cross. And so that's in fact what has happened. So where are we now on the daily chart? We are at the very bottom of this range. So we had the triangle and broke out positive after this kind of fake out, got up to your recent all-time highs, and then we got pulled right back into this area of back and forth. But we are at the lowest possible end. And we almost broke the low of that candle, which was 40,000. Actually, I think it actually, now that I'm looking at it, it pretty much got to that level today. So the low of this candle, which was slightly higher than the low of that and slightly higher than the low of that was 40,625. And the day that just finished, it actually broke that. It hit 40,600. So I'm using Coinbase, their metrics. I don't know if it's the same on other ones. I know there's slight variations. But anyway, with the one that I use, it actually has broken lower than that particular candle. So that's not good because at least you are creating slightly higher lows every time it tried to pull back. But this one, and on top of that, if you look at that candle, it broke that quite a bit. So that was the next higher low relative to this one. But now we even broke that one and slightly below this candle. So we got the new day starting. That just started about an hour and 50 minutes ago, based on my time. So what do we have here? In most likelihood, number one, just strictly talking about RSI levels, which I talk about, which I use, is we are not oversold. We're not oversold on the daily time frame. Now we are down to 41.22, and the average right here is at 51.93. So the average is pretty high, and the actual RSI is 41.2. So in my thinking, this average is going to have to get pulled down quite a bit more because I like to look at both the actual RSI, which topped out here at 81 on the daily RSI. And then back in this area, it reached 84.4, and here it got to 87.72. So just talking about the daily charts and what the RSI levels had reached multiple times, they were in the 80s. And if you remember, at some point down the road, if you got into the 80s on whatever time frame you're looking at, you're going to get into the 20s later on down the road. So on the RSI, we're only at 41, the actual RSI at this moment. So in my opinion, you're going to leave this area. You're going to leave this area completely. And what's left, you don't really have a lot of support that was built back here. Only a couple of times you had a pullback, you held that, and then you had a pullback, which created a higher daily low to that, which was at 34,758. And this is 35,744. But that actually does line up. Like this whole area right here is going to line up with what I eventually think is going to happen next. And that is using my big time frame 200-day moving average. Here it is right here. So this is how far above the 200 average we were. So in my opinion, we're going to break, we're going to get oversold into the 20s on the daily time frame, and that probably is going to line up and hit this 200-day moving average, or at least get very close to that. So what does that mean? Well, we're not going to come down in one day, not 2 days, not 3 days. This will play out over, weeks, maybe months. And as that time goes, this will slowly move up a little bit more and a little bit more. And then, in my opinion, they're going to line up to eventually meet once again, because at some point in time, they will meet again. And so that is in my long-term outlook on Bitcoin. So again, on the weekly chart, I'll jump to that, and then we'll go to Ethereum. So again, here, like I said, I'm fairly certain we're going to break below the range, which was all of these days, but these are weeks. We're going to break out of that. We are almost there, because the lowest price on that weekly that you have to hold is 40,150. So now we are basically only 2% away. And earlier today, we were only 1% away when we got down to 40,600. And the weekly area that you got to hold is 40,150. If you remember, I also mentioned that I couldn't give you anything different on the level to hold, because they were exactly the exact same thing for the daily chart and the weekly chart. It's 40,150. And so looking at last week, when we did reach the final climax, if you look at that candle, now that is a hammer down. That is a hard hammer pushing down. And you don't usually overcome that anytime soon at all. When you have a week, this is a week. Now you can see that on hourly candles, 4-hour candles, that's not uncommon. But to see this on a weekly chart, that you don't see that too often. You'll see that when something reaches a climax to the top, and then you'll see an upside down version of that when something bottoms out, and then everybody comes in and buys, and there's no more people trying to short it. So you only reached less than halfway on this particular week, which started on Sunday night technically, and here we are on beginning Friday's daily candle. This is the weekly chart though. So, and then again, talking about RSI levels on the weekly chart. On the weekly chart, we got to 83.25. So and here the weekly average, the average, that's this line here, is still hanging around at 72.81 on the weekly. So it doesn't happen often, and that was the final top. We're not going to see that for a while, in my opinion, for a long while. So we've got some consolidation on the way. Now let's go to Ethereum, and it has not pulled back as near percentage-wise from the most recent prices. It has not pulled back as hard as Bitcoin. So here's the daily chart of Ethereum. I mentioned before that tightening daily range right in here. No, right here. I was into this particular day right here. That triangle that I was saying potentially, maybe it does the same thing that Bitcoin did in those range of days that form those weekly inside bars. And it broke bull on Bitcoin, but then the very next week, the same week that it broke bull, it then reversed and created that hammer on the way down. So this did not break bull. And if I use the same metrics that I talked about, if you create the triangle from the top down to here, using this particular day, and the lows here, you'll create a triangle. You measure from the highest point in the back and the lowest point in the back. If you break to the downside, you just take that measurement and just roughly eyeing it, right? That would pull you back down into 2,300 or so for the initial move. So now, talking about the RSI levels on Ethereum, back here, when Ethereum finally started to make some ground on Bitcoin and catch up, it still never did, completely catch up, but it got up to 83 on the daily chart, 83.91. So what do I say about RSI levels? At some point down the road, if you get into the 80s, you're going to get back under 30 for sure. And so then we continued higher, cooled off a little bit, right? You cooled off the RSI, got down into the 70s, and then right here, cooled it off really nicely. And then you had one more push up right here. And that was it, in my opinion. So I believe, is going to be the same thing, except it's at different levels, right? So we're at the top end still, but I'm fairly certain we're now going to get right back into this area. And if you think about what Bitcoin's chart looked like, I believe we're going to get down to the bottom area of this, which will then, create the EMA lines to cross over. So you notice the difference on the daily chart on Ethereum, it's still it has a ways to go before these lines would cross over. You have to have quite a bit more downside, and it has to hold down there and then maybe trade sideways with a little bit of, up and down, but probably creating a bear flag and then make another leg down. Then you'll cause the 12 to cross underneath the 26 period. So I think that's going to happen. I think Ethereum is just going to come later down the road, following behind Big Daddy Bitcoin, and get back at least into this area. And then we're going to have to see what the reaction is once that happens. And on the weekly chart on Ethereum, to keep it consistent, just like with Bitcoin, this is how the weekly chart looks. So it doesn't look like anything, it doesn't look negative on the weekly chart, but, weekly candles take weeks to create, another one and another one. So that's how it is on the weekly chart. But I believe we're going to get down into this area at least. And initially, if I highlight this, if I expand this, we're going to come down and we're going to touch this 12 period. You notice how on the bull flag here on the weekly chart, during this particular week, let me take these lines out of there. But yeah, let me not take it out at the moment, right? The must hold on the weekly is about 2,100, which was that particular week there, 2,101. So that's the must hold on the weekly chart on Ethereum, 2,101. So you're still $350 away, which is, what is that? 10% would be 240 and another 100. So maybe about 14, 15% away from the bottom of that weekly bull flag. I'm sorry. That was a weekly bull flag, but anyway, I'm going to take the line out to talk about how I like to use, various time frame. I'll get into the 200. This is the 200 week moving average, But I'll go back to the daily chart on Ethereum and then I'll be all done. So if you notice, on a really strong uptrend, you finally make the crossover, right? During this period here where you bottomed out, you notice how the 12 was underneath, and then this week, and then the following week, and probably during this week, that's what created the weekly EMA line to cross over the 26 period. The 12 crossed over the 26 period. And then notice how eventually, it will come back and touch the 12 period. When you're in an uptrend, it'll come back and touch that. So I use that as a point of reference a lot of times. So as we go up here, we go sideways, we don't even touch the 12 period, and then we take another leg up, and then we create the weekly bull flag, and then that took, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, and notice precisely how that particular week lined up, because this is catching up. You see, this is catching up to the price action. As it continues higher and higher, then this has to move higher and higher because it's based on the last 12, and it gives more emphasis on probably the last 3 than the previous 9 before the last 3, if that makes any sense. I don't know the exact algorithmics that they use, but it's very interesting. So it comes back and it touches that because it trades sideways, and then this, because it held that price level, then this slowly started to catch up and catch up. So in my opinion, we're going to touch it again at some point on this weekly chart because we're too far above it. That doesn't go forever. At some point, you come back and touch it. Now, if this, doesn't pull back and we go even higher, well, then the point that it'll touch will be at a much higher price level. But in my opinion, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to go higher than this anytime soon, especially if Bitcoin keeps falling. There's going to be too much of a divergence, and that'll create too much fear. Whereas why would people be so fearful and be selling all their Bitcoin and then buying and buying and buying Ethereum? It generally goes hand in hand. It doesn't happen at the exact same time, but usually when the strongest one, the biggest one, starts pulling back significantly, I mean really big, then it's going to affect all the other coins in general. But I'm only focused on Ethereum. So in the big picture, that's what I think is going to happen. We're going to come back, we're going to touch that line, and on the daily chart, that'll probably line up with the lows of this whole area here, all the way down to potentially 2100. And by that time, this will move up a little bit more. And so those are what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the daily RSI. We need to get oversold first. That's, to me, an inevitable thing that will happen. Looks like it'll happen on Bitcoin first, and then Ethereum. And then in the real big picture, I start looking at the calculations to the retracement size. So I'm going to jump back to Bitcoin, and then I will be all done. So that's the wrap up on Ethereum. But I had one more thing that I wanted to mention, which is the total move to the upside from 15,460 on Bitcoin to 69,000 was 36,187, if I'm correct. That was the total move from 15 to 49. It came out to about 36,187. So if we retrace only 38.2, which would be considered in the big picture, that would be considered healthy. That still means that we would come down on Bitcoin. No, you know what? I'm going to have to pause this real quick because I got to make sure I get the right numbers here. Okay, I know why I got confused, because both kind of numbers are similar, but one is for one calculation and the other is for the other, and I had them mixed up. So the total move from the down 15 up to 49,000, that was 33,540. So if we retrace just a healthy 38.2, because that's considered bull flag in the big picture, we're talking big picture, not on any smaller time frame. But in the big picture, if we went up 33,540 and we retrace 38.2%, the difference is 12,812. So you subtract 12,812 from the top of Bitcoin, most recently, 49,000, and you come up with 36,187 if we retrace 38.2. And 36,187 over time, this currently is at the 200 day is currently at 33,300. So that would line up with the 200-day moving average if we pull back 38.2. So I'm expecting that to happen, that we will pull back to that price at least, right around there, 36,000 in time. Might take a few weeks, maybe it takes a couple of months, because people will be like, oh, it's dropped, let's buy. And then you get some buying pressure, and then it cools off the RSI levels, and then you take another leg down eventually. But that's what I think is going to happen. We're going to get to that level that's going to line up with the 200-day moving average initially, and then that will be interesting to see what the reaction is. Generally, when you get to that time period, like I said, I've been using this 200 moving average now on a lot of different time frames, and it really is helpful to me because I can see how that over that length of time, that's a very strong metric to use, because that's one of the biggest, right? Most people don't use anything bigger than a 200-day moving average, but I actually use it now on the weekly charts when something's really getting smashed. There's a couple things in the stock market that did that. And I said, okay, it's way under the 200-day moving average. Let's see how it lines up on the 200-week moving average. And sure enough, that is the next level that will hit. If it's not going to hold the 200-day moving average and it goes way below it, then the next biggest time frame you're going to jump to is a weekly chart. And then you get all the way to oversold on the weekly, and that lines up with the 200-week moving average. So anyway, I hope I got to the point. I know I made this a little bit longer still than I wanted to, but I didn't. I don't think I dwelled on one particular thing too long. So I hope you like what you see. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Put some likes so I can continue wanting to do this. And so far so good. I'm happy with how it's going. Have a good night. Talk to you soon.